Welcome to another session. I hope you are well. Today I'm going to speak to both sexes on a topic that I think is very, very important and relates to all of us and how we either thrive, survive, or fall short in relationships. One of my favorite books talks about self. And what I'd like to do is use an extract from the book as a theme for today's session. Now, you don't have to believe in the teachings or the philosophy in the book itself, but I think the theme itself and what I have chosen for today's session will be of value. Now, let me, just so I don't get it wrong, let me extract and read what it says, and then I'll make some modifications in our conversation today. It says, whoever finds his or her own life will lose it, but the person who loses his or her life for my sake will find it. Well, I'm not dwelling and I'm not teaching on anything relating to the meaning of that sentence. Today's theme is finding yourself and not losing yourself. I don't know about you, but I know growing up, I measured the quality of my life, the intensity of my happiness and experiences, the duration of moments that I consider to be near and dear, and even the vitality of my emotional state. I measured that on terms often that were perhaps not correctly appropriate. For example, I don't know about you, but growing up, amongst your peers, there were times when you needed to have a particular console, whether that be a video game or whether that be a device. And if you did not get that for Christmas, there was almost a feeling that your life was empty. Christmas was not complete because you had not received something that you desired and you had made known to your loved ones, your parents, that was what you wanted for a Christmas present. It was almost as though someone had broken your heart. Now, I know growing up, getting from my younger days to my older days, I also started to change my expectations. So it got to a point where it was all about sports. If I didn't win or I wasn't in the top 3 in a competition or something similar, I felt as though the life was somehow not meaningful, that I had lost something, that I wasn't complete. When we go from our, you might say, pre-teenage age and we move forward, there is something that is consistent across each of our lived experiences and our lives. The word is relationships. And whether you were 12 or you were 13 or whether you're 35 or 55, life is about people, the relationships we forge, those we nurture, those we savor, and more importantly, those we cherish. And so we tend to measure the happiness that we experience in life through the prism of our relationships. Now, within intersexual dynamics, people, generally speaking, have been conditioned to think that relationships are therefore, and I'm talking about intimate relationships in this particular essence, but also this applies to just normal, you might say, filial love and relationships, or the brotherly stergo love or relationships. We tend to expect or believe that relationships are where we find ourselves. But within the intimate setting, what tends to happen is a lot of people feel empty if they do not have a significant other, a boyfriend, a lover, a playmate, a husband, a partner, whatever derivative you choose. There's a sense of emptiness. As a matter of fact, these days, the word single is almost used as a pejorative word, as a word used to insult people, as though people, for some reason, are empty if they are single and not paired with other people. So what you tend to find, and my experience has been, that people go into relationships hoping to find themselves. Now, if this isn't you, eat the meat and spit out the bones. But, generally speaking, we haven't raised the generations in the past 7 decades to look to themselves for the answers that they wish and not to look without. So people go into relationships looking to find themselves. Now, here is where I start today's teachings. Relationships are not where you find yourself. That's the first. Number 2, relationships can be where you lose yourself. Number 3, relationships can be where, and should be where, you grow yourself. I'm going to address those 3 statements as I go through today's session. Relationships are not where you find yourself. They can be where you lose yourself, and they should be, and they can be where you grow yourself. Let's take a step back. I'm going to say a few things perhaps that you may not agree with, but hopefully stick to the essence of at the core of what I'm trying to share. Now, I believe that we are all spiritual beings. Spiritual beings, we live in physical bodies, and we've been gifted with an intellect. And the way we use our intellectual faculties determines our emotional state. So unlike other forms of the animal kingdom that are gifted with instinct and the genetic code, we lack that because we've been given the power to choose and free will. So therefore, from my perspective, it almost appears that we live in 3 levels of understanding, or we have 3 parts to our personalities: physical, spiritual, or physical, emotional, stroke mental, and spiritual. Therefore, in addressing the issue about finding yourself, losing yourself, or growing yourself, you have to decide what you believe for yourself. If you believe, as I do, that there's a spiritual part to your personality, and that spiritual part to you is perfect, it cannot be added to, because it's in its very essence is perfect. And that spiritual part of you exists in every one of us. So we are simply one at the spiritual level. And because there is no improvement to perfection, all you have to do is be aware of that part of your consciousness or your personality that already exists. Let me say, the best, the greatest, the highest form of who you are is formless in nature, and you cannot see it. I'll give you a good example. Many of you, perhaps, I have lost loved ones. And depending on how old you were and how involved you were in the process, when the person or the people were called home to glory, you may have noticed that if you had weighed the person before they passed away and after they passed away, there was no difference in the weight. Spirit is weightless. Secondly, you may have noticed, as I did, that as you stood there looking at the person that you really loved, there was a part of you that felt as though you had lost something significant, but also there was a part of you that recognized that the body you were looking at was not really the person. It was as though the real person had left. The body remained. Number 3, while she may have been grieving, I would hope there was a part of you that felt as though the presence of the person was still around. Not always present, but sometimes present. We are spiritual beings. You cannot find yourself in a relationship, because to do so in a relationship will be that you're trying to find the best part of you in a physical plane of consciousness. It will never work. Now, because we are spiritual beings and we are perfect, all we have to do is become aware. The key word is awareness. If you are aware of who you are on that plane of consciousness or spiritual consciousness, then life becomes easy, because you're never looking to another person to tell you who you are. On the lower level, we call that the emotional or the mental level. Depending on your emotional state and your mental state, there's a possibility that there could be a void, and therefore you're always seeking to find and to fill that void that you may have. In which case, you will always be looking to someone to affirm who you are. And I have found from my little life and my lived experiences that if you look to another person or group of people to tell you who you are, they will control you, and you will always remain emotional slaves to whatever they think and however they feel. Therefore, the word self-esteem, self-confidence, self-assurance, self-identity is an indication that the way you feel can be controlled by yourself. You can choose to respond to the external stimuli around you. Your environment certainly plays a part, but you can ultimately choose how you feel. You can choose the emotions you express, and you can choose the internal state, whether that be peace, chaos, doubt, certainty, light, darkness, worry, or whether you have an understanding, whether you have fear or faith. You can choose and change all of that. Whereas if you rely on the relationship itself, you become a slave to externalities. And one of the key things to keep in mind is, and here is perhaps something I learned, the one thing that is constant in life is change. Guaranteed. And whenever you connect your identity to something that is externally sculptured, recognizing that there will always be change, that would simply mean that you will always have an identity crisis. Because change is the one constant we have, and therefore whenever there is a change externally, it would bring to your awareness a change in your identity, which will bring to your consciousness the fact that you are not complete. So one recommendation I would give you, which is something I had to learn, was never build your identity on something external. And most importantly, never associate your identity with a relationship. Because life comes in seasons, with variations, with intensities, and unfortunately, with a limited duration. Sometimes relationships blossom and they wither. They start and they end. They are born and they die. So if you think of yourself as being defined by that relationship, and believing that you will find yourself in a relationship, you're almost destining yourself and signing yourself up for pain and failure and disappointment. Life is supposed to be less dramatic than we accept. Define yourself based on who you are, not based on what the relationship says. Now, the second part is your emotional state and your mental state. Here's the key thing. I have found that the way you learn how to use your intellectual faculties will always determine whether you have an emotionally rich experience or life, or whether you have a troubled existence. Let me share a few things. Think about every human being. Let me take a step back. If we were to look at animals. Let's use sheep. If you've ever witnessed a sheep being born, what you see is glorious. At the moment of conception or birth, it goes through an initial state of trying to understand where it is, calling out for mum, but within a few hours, it's doing something that is instinctive, whether that be sucking on milk, walking with mum. It understands within a few days threats. It understands how it should give itself the maximum opportunity for survival because it has instinct and its genetic code is programmed. Human beings are not like that. We're very different. How we use our intellectual faculties, just in the same way as how we use our sensory faculties, sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, that allows us to communicate with our external world and enable us to understand the world around us, but also the world within. The intellectual faculties are there to enable us to have what I would call a unique experience. Memory, imagination, intuition, perception, your will or focus. All of these intellectual faculties are there to enable you observe the world you have around you, interpret the world you have around you, and therefore create the world you wish to experience. You see, I can take a memory based on an experience I have, and I can replay that memory in my mind's eye, and I can change my emotional state. For example, as I speak with you, if I were to go silent, I can bring to the screen of my mind my mother's face. If I concentrate on my mother's face long enough in my mind, I will get very emotional. Why? Because it's a woman I love and I'm very fond of. I've done something interesting. I can be in a depressed, sad state, but by going into my memory, I can replay past experiences. Those experiences, when played on the screen of my mind, can change my emotional state, and therefore I can change my actions. Similarly, I can pre-play my dreams and goals using my imagination, and with that I can draw on the inspiration and the motivation to do what I, perhaps at the present, do not have the will to do. If you learn how to use your intellect and its use will determine your emotional state, and whether you live in a state of peace or chaos. Now the final is the physical. This is where we start to talk about intimacy, affection, and all the various physical benefits we get from being around one another. I'm not trying to trivialize the power and the role that relationships play in our lives. I'm only saying that we place too much of a burden on ourselves when we place the relationship as the master and our life and lived experience and our emotions as the slave. I have said before many times, whatever defines you places limits on you. Said differently, whatever you define yourself by has already placed limits on you. This is partly why, if you think about science, if you ask a scientist, what is science? At its very core essence, they would just simply say, science just is. The cause and effect of itself. And they might give you other variations of that. The purpose being, you define something, then you have to limit that thing. So, you do not go into relationships to find yourself. You can lose yourself in a relationship if you do not know yourself. And you can and should grow yourself in a relationship. And let me take everything we've discussed and put it to the side. And let me talk about something that might be useful to you. Whether you like it or not, whether you are aware or not, whether you are conscious or not, your history, your past, your dreams and goals, your expectations, let's say your memories, all play a part in who you are today and who you will be in the future. The way you were brought up and your upbringing, therefore, has already conditioned you either for success or for failure. Like the sponge, you have been absorbing from a young age other people's programming of you. When you get to the age of reason, 18, you are responsible for altering that program and choosing a new program that edifies you, sustains you, promotes you, preserves you. Now, if your upbringing and your programming was such that you see people as agents, then you could be one of those people who go into relationships purely on the basis of thinking, what can I get from the relationship? Like a leech, you're looking to extract. And as soon as you've extracted, you're on to the next. So it becomes easy for you to say, this relationship is limiting me. Why? Because all you've done is extracted and drawn from that relationship. If, on the other hand, you were raised with the philosophy of a friend, then it's possible you go into relationships thinking, what can I give? And how can I receive properly? Giving and receiving are intrinsically connected. You have to be a good receiver as much as you are a good giver. So, your upbringing and your subconscious conditioning is what is affecting how you experience relationships. In addition to your subconscious upbringing and your programming, your attitude plays a huge role. Your actions and your activities play a big role. The people who fail in relationships and who have short-lived relationships are always those looking to find themselves. And when they cannot find themselves, or to put it in a different way, when they haven't been able to identify or be with someone who has told them exactly who they are, they move on to the next. They feel frustrated because they haven't found what they are looking for, because they are unaware of who they are and therefore who they should be looking for. You don't look to the relationship to find yourself. You look to yourself to find yourself. The relationship, therefore, is simply a mirror that reflects who you are at the core. Now, this brings me to a concept called self-development and self-sacrifice. I did a session 3 or 4 days ago, and I talked about how parents do a huge disservice in raising children. And it's not unusual for parents to say, well, I gave up A, B, C, D, and E to raise you, to make sure you were provided for, to make sure you went to that educational institution, to pay the tuition fees. Do you know what I gave up? And I said in my conversation that is almost a narcissistic thing to do, because most parents are selfish. Bringing a child into this world is a selfish decision at its core. You do it for yourself, because at the point you make that decision, the child doesn't exist. And therefore, once the child is born, it's no longer about yourself. It should be about the child. Therefore, to remind the child of all of your sacrifices only creates, over time, a feeling in the child that makes them look at themselves in a way that is not natural, in a way that it's as though they're not good enough. But more importantly, in a manner that makes them feel that they have to always please you. So you become a master and they become a slave. They don't have freedom because they're always, rather than go through life and experience life and make the right decisions or wrong decisions or indifferent decisions, they're always thinking about how mum and dad will feel. An awful thing. On the other hand, I talk about self-development. Self-development means you become a good role model and you look to yourself to improve. So when you move into a relationship, you go into the relationship thinking, How can I give? How can I serve? How can I help? How can I be? How can I learn? As opposed to how can I take? Self-development means you become a good role model and therefore leads to admiration. Self-sacrifice, especially when shared, always leads to a negative emotion, because we, at our very core essence, we do not like to be indebted to other people. So when someone says, think about this, let's just assume I was single and you were single and you are a woman, and I took you out for a meal. And let's say in this particular instance, it was a lovely meal in a great place somewhere in central London. And I said to you, well, this would be a special occasion. The chef has a special. And let's say it was a Michelin star restaurant. And in this particular restaurant, you do not get menus. It's booked in advance. And when you walk into the space, you were served what the chef has chosen. And the meal came, and let's say you enjoyed yourself. A day later on, I said to you, can I take you out for another meal? Or let's say I tried to be intimate with you. And let's just assume this is the second or the third date. And you had reservations. And I said to you, well, I don't understand why you have reservations. After all, I spent £1,000 each on a lovely dinner with a great bottle of wine. Automatically, that places in your heart a sense that you're now indebted to me. And therefore, you almost have to pay me back, whether in kind or in time or in whatever means. It means I take you away from being responsible for yourself, and you start to place my needs first before your needs. That was me actually telling you about my sacrifices. What if I went a step further and I said, well, did you realize I actually make only £4,000 every month? And I take home £3,000, and therefore I spent a third of my salary having worked 270 hours. So almost 100 hours of my time on that dinner. Suddenly you start to feel even more guilty. This is where guilt comes in. Self-sacrifice, when expressed, makes the other party feel guilty. And this is why relationships are not where you find yourself. But there can be places where you lose yourself, because most people go into relationships and suddenly they are being told by their significant others of all the sacrifices that were made to maintain, sustain that relationship. And so you feel trapped. You feel as though you're losing yourself. You can't express yourself because you fear the consequences of that expressed part of you. But relationships can also be where you grow. You should grow in relationships. And here is how to connect the three. In the sessions that I've done, when I speak to men or speak to women, I talk about the importance of knowing who you are. For most of us, it takes time. For men, for some reason, we do not mature, or we do not come to ourselves as quickly as we should. There is a double standard that benefits us as men, and therefore we maximize that double standard, the use of time. Women, on the other hand, have a different set of cards they are dealt. They have to make decisions much faster. I talk about the importance for a man of going through stages of his life and avoiding certain decisions and maximizing other decisions, but getting to a point where he says, I have actually apprenticed under someone's guidance, someone who's actually been paying me to teach me, which is what usually a job or a career offers you. But at a certain age, you take that step to discovering and pursuing and exploring what could be your purpose or a purposeful life, recognizing that you already have the security and the backstop underneath you. Perhaps you've had some time to save. And that process of going into the wilderness to be tempted. Now I talk about a man is only as faithful as the temptations he has overcome. We all get tested and tempted. And therefore we find ourselves as men, usually when we've gone through the tests. And I talk about the tests for money, for power or fame, and for sex. And usually for most men, 35 is that age. If you stayed focused from 18 and worked hard and stayed dedicated, at 35 you've had the opportunity to have actually taken that test and passed the test successfully. For women, the number is 27. By 27, you've done your education, you've gone into the working environment, and you've worked really hard. You've become very good at something. You've achieved some level of mastery, and therefore you're ready. You've defined yourself in ways other than just being a woman or a wife or a mother. You've graduated, for example, 18 to 22, you've graduated, 23 to 27, 5 years, but that is equivalent to, if you assume 2,000 work hours every year, that is 10,000 hours of deliberate focused practice, which means you become exceptional as a professional in a job or a career. So you've defined yourself in a different way. And here is perhaps an important statement for women. The more facets to who you are, the less likely that an event in your life or a relationship in your life will sabotage your destiny. Let me say this again. Let's say you are 18, and at 18 you had become, you won several awards in sports. You're a daughter, perhaps you're a sister, perhaps you're a world champion. This is a way to define yourself. You go to university or college, you finish with a distinction. That's another definition. You go through life, and through university, you meet people, you develop new associations, new definitions. You go into work, and you work for, say, 5 years, and you work your way up to, say, director level. Another definition. If we took all of you at that point in time and we placed you in a relationship, and you've decided you want to start a family and have a union with someone, let's assume you want to be married. Being called a wife will be one extra identity you have, in addition to all of what you've achieved. And therefore, you're not limited by that one definition, as opposed to if you only had one definition, had achieved nothing completely, and all you were called is a wife. That would mean if you lost, for some reason, the title of wife, suddenly you're lost. But because you have all these identities over time, if, for example, you decided, I'm going to stop playing volleyball, my body cannot take the intensity of training, you still have all the other facets to who you are. The same thing applies for a man. But with men, here's the key point. Your purpose is what defines you, is what refuses to place limits on you and liberate you. Relationships are not supposed to be where you find yourself. They can be places where you grow. But if you do not know yourself before you come into the relationship, you're more than destined to lose yourself in that relationship. And that would not be because of the relationship. It would be because of a lack of knowledge of self. A failure to become yourself. You know, go to the temple at Apollo in Delphi. 2 words. Know thyself. There are 2 other words, and 2 other words that should be placed alongside know thyself. First, to know yourself, you have to study self. Study thyself. If you study yourself and you know yourself, the third, you have to then become yourself. So, relationships where you study yourself, know yourself, and are already becoming yourself, when you walk into such relationships, the likelihood of losing yourself is minimal. The likelihood of growing yourself is high. and you're never looking to find self because you already know who you are and you've come with self. Now, I hope that's been useful.